So, Netflix just announced their intentions to make a new That 70s show, only this time it's set to take place in the 1990s. The show is bringing back the original creators Terry and Bonnie Turner, along with Mark Brazil as the showrunner. These three came together to create That 70s show, and the husband wife duo have worked together for their entire career, including writing the screenplay of one of my favorite movies from my childhood, Coneheads. The only major exception to this rule is That 80s show. This show was created by Mark Brazil and Terry Turner, sans Bonnie. It was the previous attempt to bring the Foreman charm to a different decade. The biggest issue is that they forgot to include the Foremans. The entire show is hyped up to be a new era for That 70s show, only to be changed at some point unbeknownst to the public into an entirely new series with zero characters returning from That 70s show. Nobody expected the show to pick up when Eric got back from teaching in Africa, but they at least expected guest stars or something tying the two shows together. But no, not a single character from That 70s show reprised their role, except for Eric's hot cousin, but she's an entirely different character in this show, so I don't think that one really counts. You could have at least thrown a bone to the people who came before you and given somewhat of a bridge between the two shows to allow all viewers to come over here as well. But they didn't. The showrunners wanted That 80s show to be an entirely different entity to That 70s show, and the only thing they share in common is a similar name and the same creators. Although from watching all 13 episodes, I can say I never really got the same feel from the show that you get with That 70s show.
I woke up, her bag was packed, and she left. Didn't even say where she was going.
On the other hand, we have pancakes with egg eyes and bacon smiley faces.
That 70s show kept things light even in the most tense moments, and it managed to make us root for everyone in the main cast. I mean, I've seen countless people talking about how Hyde should have been with Donna rather than Eric, and how Fez should have gotten Jackie long before the final season. And this just shows how a large group of people resonated more with the supposed side characters than they did with the protagonist, Eric. Even a scene without Eric in it can be just as powerful or just as funny even though you're missing the guy. That 80s show was never really able to give us a character to root for, and it shows in the ratings. I mean, even Corey, the main character, is dry and kind of an ass, and it isn't in the smart-assed way Eric was, but more in a mean-spirited way that kind of turned me off the show entirely. The show debuted in 2002 and starred my favorite Golden God in his younger years as lead Corey Howard, a struggling musician who just desperately wants to be a rock star. There were multiple other cast members that would go on to do big things and become household names, or at least household characters, but even with Dennis and Hodges on the cast, the show wasn't really ever able to become a rival or even a peer of That 70s show. And I'm going into it in this video. If you have a second, why not subscribe? That way you and I can be connected virtually for the rest of our lives. Anyway, Netflix just announced that Kitty and Red would be back as regular characters on That 90s show, which is already a step in the right direction that 80s show never took. The plot also focuses on the Foreman family, with the main character Leah Foreman, who is Eric and Donna's daughter. So right off the bat, the show is leaning on the work of their predecessor. This can be a good or bad thing depending on how they handle it, but a lot of these new versions of past shows have bombed, or at least never lived up to their original hype. Having the new show based in Wisconsin again and being back in Point Place will give the nostalgic viewers some good feelings, but how long will those good feelings last until people want the show to stand on its own 2 feet? The plot focuses on Leah visiting Kitty and Red for the summer sans her parents. So depending on the ratings and amount of viewers the show can pull in, there's a lot of room for growth beyond the usual setting. For instance, we don't even know right now where she and her parents live, we don't know what they do yet, or anything of the kind. So if the show is able to convince Topher Grace and Laura Prepon to reprise their roles, then that would be a whole nother boost to the show. Especially considering after Grace's exit from That 70s show, the show dropped off the map ratings-wise, like just fell off a cliff. But let's take a look at That 80s show and see how the new formula worked out for them. Things started off on a bad foot for That 80s show, as Eric Foreman and the rest of the cast took a few seasons to warm up to in the first place, so introducing an entirely new cast of faces only increased the ire from fans once the show was eventually released, especially when those new faces act very differently from the ones you've come to know and love. The first test for this new format and new cast was in the pilot episode. It was clear that fans tuned in ready to embark on a new decade, as over 11 million people watched the pilot episode. This eagerness would quickly turn to disappointment for a large number of viewers, and by the first commercial break, less than 70% of those 11 million viewers were still hanging around. Almost 4 million viewers were so turned off by the first 8 minutes that they completely gave up on the show. Despite this inability to sustain viewers, the show scored a 6.2 rating in the Nielsen scale, which put the pilot episode firmly in the top 50. Many of the people who stopped watching would give it another chance in the following week when the second episode pulled in a rating of 4.9 and 9 million total viewers. But once again, a large number of those viewers simply couldn't vibe with what the show was putting out, so they too changed the channel before it ended. This is actually a theme across the entire season, pulling in ratings that vastly misrepresented the show's actual reach, as a large minority of viewers couldn't even make it through an entire episode. On average, only 60% of the viewers that watched that 80s show actually stayed until the outro during the entire season. That's really bad in comparison to other shows on Fox, whose retention rates were in the upper 70s and lower 80s. The fans had had enough. The second episode being such a bust made them never tune back in. They moved on to bigger and better shows, and God willing I will too once I finish this video, but regular people only have so much patience before they snap. And the third episode is just proof of that mental break, as it saw the largest drop of any episode, losing almost 4 million viewers and only pulling in a 3.2 rating. This was a nearly 40% loss in viewership from the previous episode, and sadly this wouldn't even be the lowest that 80s show would fall. Although over the next 3 episodes, the show saw somewhat of a resurgence, gaining viewers in each episode and going from just 5.8 million viewers from episode 3 to 7.36 million viewers for episode 6. This growth was very promising, as most shows fail to improve on viewership as the season goes on. Almost every show, no matter if it's Friends or Frasier, faces declining views as the season progresses. And the highest rated episodes are almost always the first and last episodes of a season, as they're supposed to be the most impactful. This growth would all be for naught, as the 7th episode once again fell off, losing over 1 million viewers and a full point in rating. This trend would continue over the next 4 episodes, seeing an average loss of 500,000 viewers each episode, and falling as far as having under 5 million viewers tune into episode 11, titled Road Trip. This is an awful showing, as the 11th episode totaled less than 50% of the viewers the pilot episode managed to capture, and it wouldn't even rank inside the top 125 shows with its low rating of just 2.69. They wouldn't give up that easily though, as the 12th episode, Beach Party, once again saw a resurgence, gaining 2 million viewers and almost 2 points in rating. This light showed that there might have been some magic inside those rickety old episodes. There was something that made viewers tune in on special occasions, and honestly during my time watching the show, I only really remembered 2 episodes, and I watched this show like only 2 months ago. Those episodes were Pilot and Beach Party. I remember the pilot because it was the pilot, so it was my first impression of the entire show, so that's a given. But Beach Party... Now, Beach Party is a different story, because the show should have ended with Beach Party instead of putting out the finale. This episode sees the gang going to the beach for a party, only to be tricked into cleaning up the beach by their friend. A lot of different antics ensue, like a slap fight and Corey's dad trying to decide if he's going to sell his business, but the biggest series-ending flag there could ever be in a show happens when the 2 main characters profess their love for each other in their own ways, before sharing a kiss on the beach as the show fades out. Bam! Series done. Over, a good ending to a subpar show, right? Well, no, because they just had to do a 13th episode and just had to try to slip in something to entice Fox to renew the show. They obviously failed to do that, and although I hate them, the ambiguous endings like this where the characters' immediate wishes are fulfilled and their immediate struggles conquered, this is the easiest way to end a show, as you handle the things you started, but leave room for the audience's imagination to let them to decide where the characters go next. And that would have been the perfect ending for that 80s show. But they didn't do that. Fox decided to cancel the show following the 12th episode's debut, allowing them to release a 13th episode as the finale. This put the showrunners in an unwinnable situation. They had already released the 12th episode, so they couldn't just rewrite a few details they had planned to get to in later episodes and handle them in Beach Party. In Beach Party, they had the perfect setup and situation to end the series on a high note rather than quickly changing the 13th episode into a makeshift ending that just leaves things in an even more awkward place. They released this 13th episode titled Sophia's Depression, which is a fine topic to delve into in a show about the struggles 20-something-year-olds face. I mean, hell, it's still evident in today's society, if not more prevalent. But the big issue is that it's just not a plot point before the finale. This, coupled with all the other new stories and threads the showrunners tried to cram into a 24-minute finale, made the episode feel jumbled and messy. We deserve to see the 12th episode in all its glory, as a star-going supernova showing all of its beauty before its lights go out forever, and letting the series end in a blaze of glory. Instead, we were given a sparkler. Yeah, it's cool at first, and it makes sparks, but more often than not, you just get tired of holding it and regret ever lighting the sparkler in the first place. And this is the fate of so many shows. They try to build for the future at a detriment to the present. They're so focused on world building and setting up future events that they never actually do anything while they're on the air, and by the time they would have gotten to the hyped up things, they've already been canceled. It happens a lot more in anime and action shows than dramas or sitcoms, but it's still prevalent in almost every genre. That '80s show would end up sharing the same fate. They were canceled before they ever got around to developing the characters past their initial descriptions, as they only really had 13 chances to do so. The show had set up several future plot points to return to in order to keep people around and see how they turned out. But Fox decided the results they'd produced weren't enough to see this future through, so they decided to shut things down. Honestly, I don't even want to watch more episodes. I'm just upset about how Fox forced the show to have such an awful ending. The show was never great or even good while I was watching it, and the ratings show that Fox was completely justified in the show's cancellation. But the opportunity to end things in an intriguing spot came and went in Beach Party. But I digress. Back to the finale. The final episode of the show once again saw a loss in viewership, losing almost 2 million viewers this time and falling back to just above 5 million total viewers. This was definitely not enough to convince the network to pick them back up, especially when they just canceled the show in the middle of the season and after an episode with much better ratings. I get it, you had nothing left to lose because the 12 episodes you'd already released resulted in the show's cancellation. It's a good idea to try some new stuff out to show that the show has depth beyond the things people hated. But still, in retrospect, the show is much more complete and wrapped up, finishing on the 12th episode than with the 13th. But I digress. As you can see from all the things I went over in this video, that '80s show was never able to capitalize on the success of that '70s show, and they even went as far as to buck comparisons in an attempt to differentiate themselves from their predecessor. Already, we're seeing signs that that '90s show is learning from these mistakes, and they're starting to move back towards what made that '70s show a hit. Just so long as that '90s show doesn't rely solely on its namesake, and instead is able to make an identity for itself while still keeping around some of the characters we love. But only time will tell if Netflix is going to get it right. And hey, even if they don't, they've kept garbage shows around for way too long before, so I doubt they'd have a problem renewing it if that '90s show tanked as well. The show also has the fact that it's going to be released on a streaming service rather than cable going for it, and that alone tends to inflate viewership numbers drastically. But I'm not going to get into that. Honestly, we don't even know the start of the production date yet, and a release date would be well over a year after that, so we're just going to have to wait a while before we find out if the show is a bust. And that's all I've got. As always, I've been Semantics. Have a great day today, everybody.